The date is June 17th, 1930. The United States is in the grip of fear. The stock market crashed just months earlier, wiping out fortunes. Factories are closing their doors. Farmers are desperate. In the White House, President Herbert Hoover is sitting at his desk, and in front of him is a bill passed by Congress. It's a massive document listing over 20,000 items imported into the United States, from Swiss watches to Canadian lumber to Italian olive oil. And next to each item, it proposes a huge tax increase. This is the Tariff Act of 1930, better known as Smoot-Hawley. Named after Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis Hawley, the logic of the bill was simple and seductive. Americans are losing jobs. Why? Because we're buying foreign goods. If we stop buying foreign goods, we'll have to buy American goods. If we buy American goods, American factories will hire American workers. Therefore, to end the Depression, we must build a wall around the American economy. It sounded patriotic. It sounded logical. It sounded like common sense. But on Hoover's desk, there was another document. It was a petition signed by over 1,000 of the nation's top economists. They were begging him to veto the bill. They predicted that if he signed it, it would trigger a global economic suicide pact. Hoover ignored the economists. He signed the bill. What happened next was arguably the greatest economic policy disaster of the 20th century. Within months, the world economy didn't just slow down, it evaporated. Global trade plummeted by a staggering 66%. The Great Depression, which might have been a short, sharp recession, turned into a decade-long nightmare that radicalized Europe and helped pave the road to World War II. This is the lesson that in a global economy, trying to protect yourself by hurting your neighbor is the fastest way to destroy yourself. So why did it fail so spectacularly? Why doesn't buying American or buying local always fix the economy? The fallacy lies in assuming that trade is a one-way street. Smoot and Hawley assumed the U.S. could stop buying from other countries, but those countries would just keep buying from the U.S. They forgot that exports pay for imports. Foreign countries earn dollars by selling things to America. They used those dollars to buy American wheat, American cars, and American machines. If you stop them from selling, they have no dollars. If they have no dollars, they cannot buy your exports. It's that simple. Furthermore, trade is political. When you slap a tariff on another country, they don't just say, "Oh, well, fair play." They say, "This is an act of economic war," and they retaliate. This is called a beggar thy neighbor policy. You try to fix your problems by making your neighbor poorer, but your neighbor does the exact same thing to you. Imagine it. Round 1. The U.S. taxes Swiss watches. Round 2. Switzerland taxes U.S. typewriters. Round 3. The U.S. taxes Swiss cheese. Round 4. Switzerland taxes U.S. cars. Both sides end up with higher prices, fewer choices, and dead industries. It is the economic equivalent of a circular firing squad. The most tragic example of this was with America's closest friend, Canada. In 1929, Canada was the United States' biggest trading partner. Our economies were deeply integrated. But Smoot-Hawley wasn't surgical. It was a shotgun blast. It tripled the tariff on Canadian eggs. It taxed Canadian lumber, copper, and cattle. The Canadian Prime Minister pleaded with Washington, "Please don't do this. It will hurt us both." Washington ignored him. The reaction in Canada was explosive. The Canadian people were furious. They voted their Prime Minister out of office and elected a hardliner named R.B. Bennett. As soon as he took power, he raised tariffs on U.S. goods. But he did something even more damaging. He went to London and negotiated the imperial preference system. Canada agreed to lower tariffs for the British Empire, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and raised them for the USA. They literally redrew the map of global trade to bypass the United States. U.S. exports to Canada collapsed. American farmers in the North, who relied on selling to Canada, went bankrupt. The very U.S. egg industry Smoot tried to protect lost its export market and collapsed anyway. It was a masterclass in how to lose your best customer. Let's look at another specific product, watches. Switzerland lived on watch exports. Smoot-Hawley jacked up the tariff on Swiss watches to protect American watchmakers like Hamilton and Elgin. The Swiss were outraged. A widespread boycott of American products swept through Switzerland. Swiss consumers stopped buying American cars like Fords and Chevrolets. But the Swiss government got creative. They looked at what they imported from the US and realized they bought a lot of American typewriters. So they slapped a punitive tariff on US typewriters. The result? Remington and Underwood, the big US typewriter companies, lost the Swiss market completely. German typewriter companies moved in and took over. And did the US watch industry survive? No. The Great Depression killed the demand for luxury watches anyway. So the US saved nothing, but it destroyed its typewriter exports. This pattern repeated itself across thousands of products. Spain retaliated against US cork, Italy against US olive oil, France against US cars. Every industry that thought it was being protected found that its customers abroad had vanished. The most famous image associated with this paradox is a chart known as the Kindleberger spiral, created by economic historian Charles Kindleberger. It looks like a spider web spiraling inward. It plots the total volume of world trade, month by month, from 1929 to 1933. In January 1929, global imports were about $3 billion. By January 1930, it was down a bit. By January 1931, it had fallen to $1.8 billion. By January 1932, it was $1.2 billion. And by January 1933, it was under $1 billion. The line spirals closer and closer to zero. In just 4 years, 2/3 of global trade vanished. Ships sat empty in harbors. Dock workers were fired. Railroads went bankrupt because there was no freight to move. The collapse of trade turned a financial crisis on Wall Street into a real economy catastrophe on Main Street. Unemployment in the US hit 25%. In Germany, it hit 30%. And we all know what happened in Germany in 1933, when 30% of men were unemployed in Hungary. They voted for a radical who promised to restore national pride. Many historians argue that without the economic devastation made worse by Smoot-Hawley, the Nazi Party might never have seized total power. The trade war fed the real war. Now, history doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. In 2018, the United States engaged in a trade war with China. The U.S. placed tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum to protect U.S. steelworkers. Did China just say, okay? Of course not. They looked for the political pain points. They targeted U.S. soybeans. Why? Because soybeans are grown in states that are politically important. China placed a massive tariff on U.S. soybeans and started buying from Brazil instead. The result? U.S. soybean farmers lost their biggest customer overnight. Silos were bursting with rotting beans. Prices crashed. The U.S. government then had to spend $28 billion in bailouts to save the very farmers they had just hurt with the trade war. The protection cost taxpayers billions. It was a mini Smoot-Hawley playing out in real time. The steel industry got a temporary bump, but the agricultural industry took a permanent hit as China shifted its supply chains to Brazil. Once you break a trade relationship, you can't always glue it back together. The Smoot-Hawley paradox is a classic prisoner's dilemma. If every country agrees to free trade, everyone benefits. That's the global optimum. If one country protects itself while others stay open, that single country might win for a short time by cheating. But if everyone tries to protect themselves, everyone becomes poor. In 1930, America chose to cheat. The world followed, and everyone lost. The lesson is simple. You cannot be an island of prosperity in a sea of despair. Economics is an ecosystem. If you poison the water to kill the sharks, you might end up killing the fish you were trying to eat. Reed Smoot and Willis Hawley wanted to save America. Instead, they helped break the world. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, consider subscribing for more stories from history.